Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me. It's great to be here. I'm Alison Campbell, and I'm the Senior Director for Global Initiatives at Internews. Internews is an international NGO that works at the intersection of local media, information, and development, with the idea that all people in communities everywhere should be empowered with the information that they need to make informed decisions for their families, for themselves, and for their communities, not just in times of crisis, but always, and that they should have access to the channels they need to make their voices heard in their societies. We work in 4 information dimensions, which pretty much covers it all. One of them is to ensure that people have access to information. One is to ensure that traditionally excluded and marginalized groups are included in the information space. We do an enormous amount of content production, or rather our local partners do an enormous amount of content production, and we build their capacity to do that. And we also work to ensure that people have the tools to understand and engage with the information that's in front of them. That's a lot to do with media and data literacy. It works. Great. We do work a lot with local media and information activists to bring their information, relevant information, to their communities. In the humanitarian space, we have a long history of working to bring information to people affected by crisis and disaster, usually because that crisis and disaster has actually affected our existing partners in local media, journalists on the ground in countries where we've been working when crisis and disaster has arisen. For us, humanitarian assistance is actually information. That's our key deliverable. We believe that information is aid. We understand very well that as much as people need food, water, shelter, when a crisis hits, and I think you'll know from your own experience, the very, very first thing that people need is information. They want to know what's going on. They want to know where their people are. They want to know whether it's safe. Should they stay? Should they go? How should they act? Is anybody coming to help them? There are a million questions that arise in a crisis situation before people actually start to look for kind of physical, certainly for any kind of humanitarian response. They're frequently, well, communities always are in first responders before any international effort is mounted. And so in this kind of situation, and for this reason, information fundamentally gives people in crisis their own agency to act, to survive, and ultimately to recover, because what they understand about what's going on will govern the extent to which they're able to engage with what is going on around them and use their own agency to get themselves through that situation. So it reduces their passivity. And I think in any crisis situation and any humanitarian response, anything that can actually engage the affected people themselves in their own survival and recovery, it's less kind of responding to do, less helping to do if people are enabled to help themselves. So Internews very much looking to put affected people at the center of our information responses. And the other most fundamental dimension, I think, of an Internews-style response is that we, a little different from the kind of perhaps more traditional accepted understanding of humanitarians communicating with beneficiaries, is to give them messages, health messages or public service announcements or something in that regard. I mean, Internews, where we have local media to work with who are the trusted channels and conduits of information for their communities in crisis, where that can be supported to bring a much fuller range than simply information about services or instructions about where to go or what to do or how to behave. Local media, trusted voices and channels in communities have the potential to bring a much fuller kind of more 360. I mean, if you can imagine how you would like your public radio station to behave for you in a time of crisis, and the full 360 degree of information that you would feel that you needed, that's what Internews supports local media or other agents in a situation. Sometimes we have to do it ourselves. or at least for some period of time. But that's the kind of information that we seek to bring. Not only that, to give it to them, but much as with your local radio station, I imagine in a time of crisis, or other channels through which you could make your voices heard, through which you could ask questions. So people asking questions is what we call an information needs assessment. How do you assess people's information needs? Well, you listen to the questions that they have to ask you. So although it seems sometimes very clear for humanitarians coming into a crisis, well, people are obviously going to need this and this and this, we view things a little bit more circumspectly. A certain amount of that has to happen. But sometimes the things that people need to know, they don't know what they don't know in some situations. And sometimes they know things that we and humanitarians don't know. And so listening to people in crisis is a really good way to understand how any response can be nuanced to meet the needs that they actually have. Needs for information, that's kind of our business, but very often expression of a need for information is also an expression of a need for a service of some kind, which is the business of responders. So in the old days, back in the old days of 10 or more years ago, when we went through, for instance, Haiti or Pakistan earthquake, it was a primary point of advocacy for Internews that there wasn't enough information out there, particularly at hyperlocal levels, because national broadcasting, giving you the big news, doesn't always tell you exactly what you should be doing to help yourself in your immediate neighborhood, but there wasn't enough information out there for people in crisis. And this is something that has changed really quite a lot in the last 10 years. I think the role of information more generally, the role of information driving crises, the role of information driving the behavior and responses of affected people in crisis, these are all rather new information features writ large in crisis and in response. These days, although we usually do have information deficit, can be in sudden onset emergencies most immediately when towers go down and that sort of thing. Very quickly, as soon as things reestablish themselves, we start to actually see, and this is an information technology thing, we do start to see a kind of an information glut can set in. And this is actually not primarily about humanitarians trying to communicate to people, but what people say amongst themselves. So the grapevine is always an ever-present thing in humanitarian response, and social media flows and information technology has kind of put that grapevine on steroids now. And inside that information glut, it becomes really difficult for people to understand what is true. Rumor and misinformation have become themselves something which we now need to deal with in the information space in crisis. And Internews has some neat new tools in tracking, surfacing, analyzing, and bringing to the attention of communities and humanitarians rumor, misinformation. In some places it's actual propaganda. There's malicious use of information by smugglers, gangs, and others. All of this can make populations actually more vulnerable. So our space has changed in interesting ways. In some places, technology enables much for the better. In other places, it brings a raft of issues which we are trying to solve. We are essentially platform neutral. We don't advocate for specific solutions for specific situations. Rumor tracking can be done with high and low technology. It's really all about the methodology. Innovation for us, the genius is in the methodology and the mix that we choose to apply in any given situation according to how that affected population will trust, generally access, trust, and use the information that is brought to them by us or by the humanitarian community. And my time is overly up. Thank you.